The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time contains some of the most amazing dungeons in the entire Zelda franchise. Being the very first Zelda game I've ever played, going through these dungeons was, and still is, one of my favorite experiences in all of Zelda. In the end, the outstanding atmospheres and puzzles every one of these dungeons had to offer cannot be forgotten. So in this video, I will be ranking this game's 9 dungeons in order of worst to best. Enjoy! Coming in at number 9, we have Lord Jabu-Jabu's Belly. To be honest, this dungeon gets a lot of hate, and I can see why. The atmosphere is really unique and open to criticism. The puzzles were generally easy and didn't take very long to complete. Not to mention, Queen Ruto was really rude and got very annoying. You know, with her constant lectures and having to pick her up and all. Overall, you don't usually see dungeons like this one in The Legend of Zelda, which is definitely a pro, but it also had its fair share of cons, putting it down at number 9. At number 8, we have the Great Deku Tree, aka mine and many others' first ever dungeon from the Zelda franchise. While this dungeon may have been bland, it was my first ever dungeon in the whole franchise, which does mean it will always hold its place in my heart. It was more of a tutorial than anything, but hey, I will admit the atmosphere was pretty cool, although the puzzles were extremely easy and didn't take much time to complete at all. Anyways, although the Deku Tree may not have been an overall great dungeon, the fact that it was my first dungeon in all of Zelda scores at some points with nostalgia. At number 7, we have Dodongo's Cavern. When you compare this dungeon to this game's other original dungeons, there really is no comparison. Whether it's the puzzles or just the general environment this dungeon had to offer, it was a huge step up from Jabu-Jabu's Belly and the Deku Tree. Not to mention, being my second completed dungeon in Zelda, it brings back a lot of good memories and nostalgia. One of my favorite parts of this dungeon was when you have to bomb the giant Dodongo statue's eyes to open up the way to the dungeon's boss. I don't know why, but that part has always stuck with me for some reason. Anyways, between this dungeon's memorable puzzles and creepy, dark environment, it really is a great dungeon. Number 6, we have easily one of the most memorable final dungeons in the Zelda franchise, Ganon's Castle. This was the first real creative final dungeon in the Zelda franchise, and not to mention, this dungeon is actually pretty freaking cool. Especially the first part where you need to complete each element specified room, whether it was shadow, forest, fire, water, or spirit. Then, once you destroy each barrier and make your way up to the main tower and climb the endless flights of stairs leading up to Ganondorf, all the while his creepy organ music is playing. Truly a memorable Zelda experience. Coming in at number 5 is a very controversial pick, especially considering its higher placing on this list. And that pick is none other than the infamous Water Temple. You know what I say about this dungeon? Who doesn't like a good challenge every now and then? And I know what some of you are thinking, this dungeon was way too hard. But some people like a good challenge. I'm also not going to put the iron boots, kokiri boots switching as an excuse to put this dungeon low. Sure, it was tedious, but that doesn't make it the worst Zelda dungeon of all time. Trust me, if you think that was tedious, try playing some of the dungeons in the original Zelda. Anyways, besides that, the two main reasons I particularly liked this dungeon was the innovative puzzles and the outstanding environment. Seriously, how isn't a creepy, abandoned worship temple at the bottom of a lake with multiple floors descending into the depths not awesome as hell? Along with the subtle, fitting tune to go with it. And the relatively challenging puzzles throughout the dungeon. Like I said, who doesn't like a good challenge? Anyway, sorry for the long rant. It's just I felt I needed some explaining to do to avoid any backlash. At number 4, we have the Fire Temple, one of the game's more popular dungeons. Before I go any further, I just want to point out that I absolutely loved this dungeon as a whole. The mechanics, the atmosphere, the backstory, the puzzles. Easily my favorite part about this dungeon was having to free the imprisoned Gorons. Not only did this strike a sense of suspense and urgency in the player, but it offered a multitude of different memorable puzzles and challenges throughout the dungeon. The dark, fiery environment made this dungeon twice as good and was truly perfected. I guess I've always kind of had a taste for this dungeon's outstanding atmosphere. The eerie theme this dungeon had was also a huge plus and perfectly fit the dungeon's environment. And it contains one of my favorite items in the Zelda franchise, the Megaton Hammer. The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time's Fire Temple truly is an outstanding dungeon overall. At number 3, we have one of the scariest, most unique dungeons in the franchise, the Shadow Temple. It isn't very often you see a dungeon like this in the franchise. The terrifying and disturbing environment it took place in was definitely one of the best features, along with its top quality puzzles, challenging enemies, and memorable moments. I don't know, there's just something about being in a haunted underground torture chamber that's genuinely intriguing, especially for a rated E Zelda game. I mean, there's guillotines and other torture devices everywhere you look. And who can forget the ride on the boat of death? Or being closed in by the two spiky walls, or that dark, depressing tune in the background. And I know I've mentioned it 1,000 times already, but the sheer environment this dungeon took place in was absolutely insane. The Shadow Temple is by far a good enough dungeon to make it this far up on my list, and maybe even in the top 20 Zelda dungeons of all time. Number 2, we have one of my favorite dungeons in the whole Zelda franchise, one that simply cannot be forgotten by any true Zelda fan, the Forest Temple. To be honest, the layout of this dungeon was absolute genius. A forgotten, decrepit old haunted mansion in the depths of the forest. Then, to make things even more interesting, you need to go into this mansion and find 4 spirits lurking within and return them to their rightful place. Not to mention, the atmosphere you get to see while roaming this dungeon is complete and utter magic. The contrast they put between the mansion and the outside courtyard is one that sticks with you even years after playing and can evoke utter feelings of nostalgia in the player. And the puzzles. Don't even get me started on those. My favorite was definitely the twisting and turning of the hallways. Probably the most unique puzzle in this game as a whole. And one cannot forget about this dungeon's eerie, yet calming theme. Overall, the Forest Temple definitely deserves its rightful spot this high on my list, and was even almost chosen as number 1, and is undoubtedly in my top 10 favorite Zelda dungeons of all time. I will say that in the end, it was a very close call between the Forest and Spirit Temple, but I know there is no other dungeon I like better than the Spirit Temple in Ocarina of Time. I don't even know where to begin with this dungeon, unless you want to hear me go on a 20-minute rant about it, but I'll just try to shorten it up as best I can. The ancient Egyptian atmosphere was an outright masterpiece. I literally feel like I am in a pyramid every time I enter this dungeon. It's insane. It could not have been perfected any better than it already was. The theme is one of my favorite dungeon themes, let alone themes in all of Zelda, and really makes you feel like you're in an ancient Egyptian atmosphere. The concept of time travel between young Link and adult Link to complete the dungeon was sheer genius and offered a multitude of some of the most unique puzzles in the whole Zelda franchise. The puzzles were great, the enemies were great, the music, the everything. This was just all around an undeniably great dungeon. Yup, no opinions here, this dungeon was just great. Anyways, I could see why one might choose the Forest Temple over this one. They are both top 10 materials in the end, but because of all of these reasons listed above, I needed to give the Spirit Temple the honor of being chosen as not only my absolute favorite dungeon from Ocarina of Time, but one of my top 10 favorite dungeons in the whole Zelda franchise, maybe even top 5. Hey everybody, thank you all so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed the video, then please be sure to leave a like and subscribe, and leave your opinions in the comment section below, along with a question for my mailbag series. We haven't been getting a lot of new questions from new askers, so if you're new to this channel and you want to know what my mailbag is, pretty much what you do is you ask a question about Legend of Zelda in the comment section or in my Q&A question form, which can be found in the description. Pretty much you ask me like what my favorite boss is, or like my favorite dungeon, or like what I think about this, what I think about that, and I answer those questions in a video. And it's pretty cool. It's an easy upload, it's easy to edit, easy to make, it's fun. So if you have a question, be sure to leave one in the comment section. And sorry for not uploading for so long. I definitely hope to have another video out for you guys in the next month, or maybe even sooner. Really just depends. But yeah, that's about it. Thank you all so much for watching this video, and we'll see you hopefully soon.